No one in prehistory ever looked at a piece of meat and thought about grams of protein. No one counted calories, tracked macros, or worried about a daily intake target. And yet, for most of human history, obesity was essentially absent, and conditions like type 2 diabetes and heart disease were rare enough that some researchers studying isolated populations in the 20th century struggled to find cases at all. That's not a coincidence. It's a clue about what actually kept the human body in balance before anyone had a word for diet. Let's start with what's actually been measured, not guessed at. Since the 1960s, researchers have studied a handful of populations that still get most of their food through hunting, gathering, or simple small-scale farming. Groups like the Hadza in Tanzania, the Tsimane in the Bolivian Amazon, and islanders in Kitavans, Papua New Guinea. These aren't identical cultures eating identical foods. The Hadza eat a lot of tubers, honey, and wild meat. The Tsimane rely heavily on plantains, rice, and fish. The Kitavans eat mostly root vegetables, fruit, coconut, and fish, with very little processed food of any kind. Different diets, different environments, different continents, but the pattern that shows up across all of them is strikingly consistent. Extremely low rates of obesity, low blood pressure that doesn't rise much with age the way it typically does in industrialized populations, and markers for heart disease that researchers repeatedly describe as close to the lowest ever recorded in any population studied. A cardiology team that studied the Tsimane over several years using CT scans found that the vast majority of Tsimane adults over the age of 40 showed no signs of coronary artery plaque at all. A strikingly different picture than what shows up in similarly aged populations in the United States. That's not a fringe anecdote. It's one of the most cited findings in the field of evolutionary medicine, precisely because the result was so consistent and so measurable. So if it isn't calorie counting, what is it? The first big difference is food diversity paired with unprocessed form. A typical hunter-gatherer or small-scale farming diet includes dozens, sometimes over 100 different plant and animal species across a year. Nothing is stripped down, refined, or reconstructed. A whole root vegetable is eaten as a root vegetable. Meat is eaten as meat, with the fat, connective tissue, and organ meat included, not separated out into a single cut. That matters, because whole foods tend to be harder for the body to break down quickly, and they arrive packaged with fiber, water, and micronutrients that processed versions of the same ingredient usually lose. Compare that to a typical Kitavan or Tsimane meal, which nutrition researchers have measured directly, versus a typical Western diet, and one difference stands out immediately: the amount of highly refined carbohydrates and added sugar. In Kitavans, for example, researchers found that refined sugar and processed grains made up close to none of the daily diet. Most carbohydrate intake came from root vegetables and fruit, digested far more slowly than white flour or refined sugar. That slower digestion means a slower, smaller rise in blood sugar after eating, which places far less repeated demand on the body's insulin response over a lifetime. This connects to the second major factor. Physical activity wasn't a separate category of life. It wasn't scheduled for an hour at a gym. It was baked into how food was obtained in the first place. Studies measuring daily energy expenditure among the Hadza using doubly labeled water, a precise method for tracking real-world calorie burn, found that despite walking, digging, and climbing for hours most days, their total daily energy expenditure wasn't dramatically higher than that of a sedentary adult in an industrialized country. That finding actually surprised researchers when it was published in 2012. The explanation that's emerged since is that the human body appears to adapt its overall energy budget within a fairly tight range, shifting energy away from processes like inflammation and reproduction when physical activity is high, rather than simply burning more total calories the more active someone is. What that suggests is important. The benefit of constant movement in ancient life probably wasn't mainly about burning more calories overall. It was about how the body used the calories it had. more of it going towards muscle maintenance and metabolic regulation, and daily movement keeping insulin sensitivity high, meaning the body needed to release less insulin to manage the same amount of food. The third factor is simply the absence of constant eating. Without refrigeration, packaging, or a kitchen stocked with snacks at all hours, food access was naturally irregular. Meals happened when food was available, not on a fixed 3 times a day schedule filled with snacking in between. Several researchers studying traditional populations have noted long stretches, sometimes most of the day, without eating, followed by a substantial meal. That pattern gives the digestive and hormonal systems extended periods without needing to manage incoming food, which is functionally similar to what's now studied under the label of intermittent fasting, except in this case, it wasn't a chosen practice, it was simply how food access worked. None of this means ancient life was free of health problems. It wasn't. Skeletal remains show plenty of evidence of injury, infection, and in many periods, seasonal food shortages that caused real physical stress. Life expectancy at birth was also much lower than today, largely driven by high infant and childhood mortality, a statistic that gets misread constantly, since an adult who survived childhood in these populations could often live into their 60s or 70s. The point isn't that the ancient world was healthier in every sense. It's that the specific cluster of conditions now responsible for the majority of deaths in industrialized countries, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and the metabolic problems connected to them, were rare to the point of being almost undetectable in these populations. And researchers have been able to trace that difference to specific, measurable factors: food diversity, minimal processing, natural movement built into daily life, and irregular rather than constant eating. Calorie counting as a concept only makes sense in a food environment where it's genuinely hard to know what you're eating, where sugar is hidden in sauces, where a single meal can be assembled from a dozen industrially processed ingredients, and where food is available at every hour of every day. None of those conditions existed for most of human history. Not because ancient humans were disciplined. They didn't need discipline for a problem that their environment simply didn't create. That's really the core of it. The human metabolism wasn't designed around a number. It evolved around a pattern, variety, whole foods, irregular intake, and constant low-level movement. Once that pattern broke down, the body kept behaving exactly the way it always had. It just no longer matched the world it was reacting to.